Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I've got a deeply chilling and intriguing story to share with you from the depths of the Russian Creepypasta forums. Before we begin, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and once the video is over, drop a comment to let me know if the story gave you the chills and share your overall thoughts. Alright, let's dive right in. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy the video. 10 days a month. There were days when we weren't allowed to step outside our yard. There were about 10 such days every month. Personally, it was hard for me to spot those days, but the adults somehow sensed them using their own grown-up signs. On those days, life seemed to go on as usual. Everyone had fun, chatted loudly, and played games. Grandpa and Dad would bring out the chess, checkers, lotto, or cards, and turn on concerts on the TV. Mom and Grandma would cook especially delicious meals, and we'd eat out in the yard under the big cherry tree. But underneath all that festivity, there was something forced and tense. Grandma and Mom walked around pale with strained smiles. They talked about cheerful things, but their eyes kept darting around. Dad and Grandpa tried to joke, but all their jokes fell flat and awkward. Whenever they had to drive out of the yard on those days, which was the only safe way to go outside during that time, they would prepare for it for a long time, looking gloomy and somehow sorrowful. What saddened me was that I wouldn't see my friends for a whole 10 days. I even tried to break the rules once and sneak out. After all, Vladik lived right next door, just a 2-minute walk from his gate to mine. What could possibly happen? I didn't even make it out of the yard. Mom spotted me in time, and Dad gave me a good whipping with his belt for it. It was the only time in my life I was ever spanked. I never tempted fate again and entertained myself with whatever I could find within the radius of our yard, from the vegetable garden to the front gate. Why weren't we allowed to go out? As a kid, I didn't know, and after that whipping, I didn't really feel like asking. But from my parents' hushed conversations in the kitchen, I gathered that there was someone out there on the street, and it wasn't the usual stray dogs or wolves you'd expect in the countryside. It was someone else. Once I turned 10, the fence and the gate became a forbidden zone for me too, and the belt had nothing to do with it. That day, my ball rolled over to the gate, and I ran after it. I remembered that it was currently one of those days when we couldn't leave the yard, but I wasn't planning to leave anyway. I just needed to grab the ball that had rolled up to the fence. Besides, it was such a beautiful day. The birds were singing, the sun was shining, so bad thoughts didn't even cross my mind. I ran up to the fence, grabbed the ball resting by the gate, and was just about to bolt back into the yard when I saw a girl standing right on the other side of the fence. She wore a headscarf tied under her chin and was glaring up at me from under her brows. I was so stunned by her malicious, piercing stare that I froze. What surprised me wasn't that she had left her yard on a day like this, nor that she was standing behind our fence peering into our property, but rather the strange, intense hatred in her eyes, something unnatural for a child. And the longer I looked at her, the uglier her face seemed to get, until I realized it wasn't a girl at all. It was a vile, tiny old crone, shorter than a 10-year-old. "Sasha, what's wrong?" Mom called out, looking out the window. I snapped out of my stupor, spun around, and sprinted back to the house, clutching the ball to my chest. As I ran, I caught a glimpse of Mom staring intently and tensely at the gate. When I burst into my parents' room, she was still standing by the window. I threw myself into her arms and babbled, "There was some weird old woman out there. She was looking into our yard." "What are you talking about, Sasha? You just imagined it," Mom replied gently, kissing me and holding me tight. But I could hear her heart pounding, and remembering how she had looked at the gate when I was running away, I knew she had seen everything. Nothing of the sort happened for a long time after that incident, but for those 10 days every month, I still avoided going near the gate and generally tried to play only in the small clearing in the middle of the yard. Soon enough, I noticed that all my relatives were doing the same. They didn't pick apples or pears from the trees near the fence, nor did they prune the roses and grapes growing by the gate. Or rather, they did, but only after the designated 10 days had passed and we could freely walk the streets and play wherever we pleased again. So for 2/3 of the month, life went on as usual. We went to school, played in the streets, fished in the river, and picked mushrooms in the woods. But for the remaining third, we sat confined to our yards. Only those who had cars could leave. As long as you were in a car, you were safe. But whenever I begged Dad and Grandpa to take me with them on those days, they would grimly refuse, saying I might see things I shouldn't. I realized exactly what kind of things when I turned 14. Usually during those 10 days, Mom and Grandma wouldn't leave the yard, but they would peacefully work in the vegetable garden right next to it. Eventually, they gave that up too. It happened after we saw the old crone out there. We were having dinner in the yard when I heard some strange noises, like a cat trying to hack up a hairball. I noticed everyone staring at something behind me, their eyes wide with shock. I turned around and saw a decrepit old woman walking through our garden, hunched entirely in half, shuddering all over as if trying to hold back the urge to vomit. After taking a couple more steps, she suddenly planted her hands on her knees and threw up her own intestines right onto our strawberry patch. After vomiting about 6 feet of her guts, she hiked up her skirts, squatted over the garden bed, and pushed out even more of her bowels. Then she stood up, brushed herself off, and slowly limped away. We never discussed this incident in the family. We avoided the subject as if it was something indecent. There were other incidents too. For instance, I remember once we stayed out in the yard until dark, and suddenly there was a loud knocking at the gate. Turning around, I saw several pale-faced people standing behind the fence. All of them were quite short. It was too dark to make out the details, but I saw one of them squeeze their head through the gaps in the fence, smiling. "Just don't look at them. They can't come in on their own," Mom explained to me, and everyone went back to laughing and talking. But I kept stealing glances in that direction, and all those people were still there, climbing on the fence, rattling the handle, smiling at me. There was another time that same summer, only in July. I was picking apricots in the yard when I heard someone calling my name. I turned toward the voice and saw Anton standing outside the gate, a guy 3 years older than me from the next street over. "Sasha, come out and play." This struck me as odd. We talked sometimes, but we weren't really friends and only hung out in large groups. "I don't think we're supposed to go outside right now," I said cautiously. "Come on, there's nobody out here. I've been walking around all these days and haven't seen a soul. Let's go to Yaroslav's and play computer games." Yaroslav was the only boy in the village who owned a computer. Reluctantly, I walked toward the gate. On the one hand, I didn't want to disobey my parents, who knew what could happen on the street during those days. On the other hand, I didn't want to look like a wimp in front of an older guy. Anton smiled encouragingly, and I noticed his teeth were somehow small and grew unevenly, overlapping each other as if he had 3 rows of them. His eyes looked like Anton's, pitch black, but they squinted strangely, looking slightly in different directions. I stopped. I was standing close enough to see that this was someone who merely looked like Anton, but wasn't him at all. "What?" asked Anton, still wearing that smile, and his voice was entirely different, not his at all. I turned on my heel and bolted for the house. Looking back, I saw he hadn't left. He was just watching me with that same bizarre grin. There was another completely baffling incident. I knew that if you were in a car, you had nothing to fear, especially if you drove straight into the yard and then quickly shut the gate. But that didn't protect you from what you might see through the window. That day we had to rush into town, so Dad, Grandpa, and I went. When we were on our way back, pulling up to the house, I saw a boy walking through our yard. He walked out onto the street through the gate, which was somehow open, and headed towards us, but he was walking backward. We stopped and the boy passed by us. I turned around and saw that it was me. I was walking, smiling broadly, wearing clothes I'd never owned. Dad and Grandpa didn't see anything, or pretended they didn't. When we got out of the car, I looked back again and saw that the boy was still moving away from us backward, still smiling, staring right at me. The gate turned out to be locked, and when I later asked Mom if she had seen anyone in our yard, she looked surprised and said no. It wasn't just my own doppelganger I saw. I was sitting at home once on a terribly hot day. Everyone in the household had scattered to their rooms for a post-lunch nap. Only Grandma was in the kitchen washing dishes and I was watching TV. Suddenly, I heard a strange clicking sound coming from the window, like someone clicking their tongue. I peeked out and there was my grandpa, lying on the bench in the yard, shielding his face from the sun with his arm, dozing. I turned my head, and there was Grandpa snoring in his room. I could see him clearly through the open door. I looked back out the window, and Grandpa was lying there too. I went to the kitchen and told Grandma. She got scared, started wailing. It started again. It started, and I completely forgot. She dropped everything and ran to lock all the windows and doors in the house. In general, that was exactly why it was our custom to always keep the yard gates closed, even if nothing strange had happened for a long time, because those weird people who occasionally roamed the streets somehow couldn't open even the most basic gate, even one without a hook or latch. But if it was left open, they could easily waltz right into the yard, and that, as a rule, was exactly what they were trying to do. There were also attempts to lure me out of the house. Once, for example, Vladik called our landline and asked me to hang out. I told him it was better not to walk the streets right now, so he said, "Let me come over. We can watch TV at your place. Come out. I'm almost there." And sure enough, after hanging up and stepping out onto the porch, I saw Vladik already standing behind the gate. The thought flashed through my mind, how did he get here so fast? And I stopped in my tracks. "Well, what's taking so long?" he shouted. "Just come in, why are you standing there?" I yelled back. "Open the gate for me first." "Just push it and walk in, what's the problem?" "Is it really that hard for you to open the gate?" Vladik screamed. "Your damn latch is jammed, do you get it or not? I can't get in!" I turned around and silently walked back into the house. There was no latch on our gate. After that, both Yaroslav and Vladik called me several more times, trying to lure me out during the bad days, but they all failed the gate test, even though they usually breezed into my yard with ease. Over time, they got sneakier, inviting me over to their houses on the phone, and when I refused to come, they would get furious and shower me with choice curses. I wasn't bothered by it. My real friends received identical calls supposedly from me, and the fake me was equally incapable of entering their yards. The weird incidents happened more often during the warmer months, or maybe that's just how I remember it. I only recall one instance occurring in winter. We were having breakfast in the kitchen when we heard someone shuffling footsteps in the yard, followed by a loud, raspy cough. "Someone's here," Mom said. She got up from the table and walked over to the kitchen window, which offered a clear view of the yard. Instantly, she gasped, turned pale, and hastily drew the curtains. "I forgot to close the gate," Dad realized. Everyone leaped up from their seats and began pulling the curtains shut on all the windows in the house. That day, no one went to work, I wasn't allowed to go to school, and for 24 hours we sat in front of the TV, using the volume to drown out the footsteps, the coughing, and the knocking on the doors and windows, which, by the way, were positioned way above human height, because our house was built on top of a garage. The next morning, it all stopped. What could happen if you let yourself be lured out of the house or yard, or encountered one of those bizarre people on the street? I didn't know for sure, but I'd heard more than once about a tragedy involving a young woman from our village. Her name was either Olya or Yulia, and she used to live on the next street over. She was out walking with her baby and saw something that terrified her so much she ran away, abandoning her infant in the stroller. She ran home in tears. Her husband, parents, and neighbors immediately gathered together and marched back to the spot where she'd left the baby, but all they found was an empty stroller. When the search for the child turned up nothing, the family abandoned their house and left the village. Just what did she see to make her run away in such terror, leaving her own baby behind? Her parents refused to say. Actually, they never told me anything about any of this. The only thing I pieced together from eavesdropping was that all these weird people came from the ravine that started right past our street. If you saw black smoke pouring out of the ravine, or if it looked like the trees that were burning and falling, it meant they would soon start walking again, and it was time to lock ourselves in our yards. And keeping the gate open was strictly forbidden at all times, even if nothing strange had happened for a while. Once I was at home when a neighbor called our landline and asked, "Sasha, is your gate left open?" "I don't know," I answered. "Why?" "Well, your mom and I are sitting here in my kitchen drinking tea, but there's a woman who looks just like her wandering around your yard." I peeked out the window and saw that, sure enough, my mom was wandering the yard in some weird, filthy sweater, like something taken off a homeless person. Every so often she would stop, bend down, and start digging in the dirt with her bare hands. Then Mom's voice came through the receiver. "Sweetie, just make sure you lock all the doors and don't open them if she knocks. She'll leave on her own." I can't say that what was happening scared me too much. There were even times during the restricted days when I deliberately sat on the windowsill, hoping to catch a glimpse of something bizarre through the window. I often managed to see Mom, Grandma, or Grandpa walking down the street, while at the same time hearing their voices from the next room, knowing full well they were home. Sometimes I'd see relatives who lived in another town working in our garden or the neighbors, people who logically couldn't possibly be there. Once, I saw myself pounding on the gate, calling out to Mom to let me into the yard, but most often I saw fires in the ravine, which, as Mom explained to me, weren't actually real. I could see the black smoke and tongues of flame in the distance, but I understood they weren't really there, and that was a bizarre sensation. I also used to see a black Volga car that drove around the streets, though mostly it drove through the ravine. When it drove past our house, I could see that there was no one inside. Grandma once let it slip that back during the Soviet Union. Some city folks came out to the ravine in a black Volga like that to relax, got drunk, and started a fire. Part of the forest burned down, and people and animals died. Ever since then, the ravine periodically catches fire, and that car drives around the village. It was an incident involving this very Volga that made my parents firmly decide to leave. By that point, nothing strange had happened for a long time, and the kids were playing freely in the streets. Vladik, Yaroslav, and I even went down into that very ravine, but didn't find anything interesting. Many people thought it was finally over. But then, completely out of the blue, that driverless black Volga appeared, plowed at full speed into a group of kids playing, ran over 2 little boys, and vanished. If people had tolerated what was happening before, not wanting to abandon their established homes, the death of children was the final straw. By that time, my mom had already given birth to my little brother, and they decided to move for the baby's safety. Granted, it took more than a year to actually do it, and for a long time we had our nerves frayed by those 2 little boys run over by the Volga. They'd walk the streets after their own funerals, calling out to my baby brother to come out and play. But eventually, we managed to leave that place. I can say that the events I've described didn't traumatize my psyche. At 17, thanks to some benefits and my own decent grades, I managed to get a state-funded spot at a university, which got me a room in a city dorm. Dad eventually managed to find a good job in the same city, so my parents and little brother soon followed my lead. Unfortunately, Grandpa is no longer alive, but according to Grandma, it hardly feels like he's gone. She still occasionally sees him sleeping in the yard or spots him from the window walking down the street, so she never feels lonely. So, that's the story, guys. What did you think? Did it give you the creeps? Let me know your thoughts on the story and the video as a whole down in the comments. Since this is the very first video on this channel, I really value your feedback. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please drop a like and subscribe. For now, I'll say goodbye. See you all in the next video.